I am just doing so much bragging at the end of this year. And I'm okay with that. Hello, my name is Margaret Adele, and today we are going to talk about how my TBR challenge is going. It's going great. Spoilers. But it's been a lot of fun. So early in this year, like early January of 2022, I decided that I was going to put all of my owned books on my Goodreads, so I'd finally have like a number or at least a ballpark amount of all the books I owned, either physically on a reading app or as a review book. And the number I got at the beginning of this year was 430. Now, granted, that probably wasn't exactly accurate because there were some books that I had added on Goodreads that weren't books I physically owned. Either I just included them as books I was interested in or I'd already unhauled the books. But within like maybe five books, that number was correct. And as I sit now, I have under 130 books on my owned TBR. So that means I cut 300 books off my TBR, either through actually reading them or unhauling, or in some cases just removing them from the TBR after not actually owning them at all. Regardless, I want to get into a little bit of how I did this, the wider act of slimming down the TBR that seems to be going on in some corners of BookTube, and how I'm going to act on it moving forward. So for the longest time, I have joked that I am going through a hippie evolution, slowly but surely. And one day you will come to my house to find me in my vegetable garden or my herb garden where I make my own tea blends, wearing a dress I hand-sewed myself out of bed sheets. I see my future and it is bright. And with this evolution in mind, I wanted to try and do my unhaul/TBR out of eco-friendly purchasing ideology. And there's a lot to it that I don't think a lot of people know that isn't widespread, but I was trying to use these concepts as I slimmed down my TBR. And a big one is that unhauling isn't actually as eco-friendly as most people think, because a lot of the stores, thrift stores, secondhand stores that get this giant amount of stuff often can't do a lot with the majority of it. They just get such a giant amount, such a tonnage of stuff that they can't actually fit it all in the store, and some of it just can't be sold. And as a result, thrift stores will actually end up throwing a lot of stuff out just because of lack of resources. So I had to do my unhauling very slowly, but that was only for the physical books. Thankfully for me, most of my unhauling was done digitally, and it was all because of BookBub. So if you are unaware, BookBub is a daily email service that will email you deals to indie books. Well, not just indie books, a lot of books, but for me, it was my indie book gateway. Because if a book is offered for free on BookBub, it is almost a guarantee that that book is indie published, mostly self-published. Most traditional publishers, if they offer deals on their books, ebooks, it will usually be at least a couple dollars. So for the longest time, I would just go on BookBub and download whatever free book looked even remotely interesting. As a result, I had gigantic amounts of ebooks on my app that I barely remembered, if I remembered it at all. So early days of the unhauling was literally just me going through and first unhauling all of the books that were obviously I wasn't interested in anymore, usually the ones at the far back of the library. But also I had to get really honest with myself because I had a lot of book genres that I either didn't read at all but told myself I was going to, or book genres that I low-key liked, but I had way more books than I had interest in them, if that makes sense. Like I would have, I do read some urban fantasy, and I would maybe read a couple books a month on urban fantasy, and those would mostly be shifter romances, but I had like a full third of my Kindle library was these urban fantasies. And I'm like, there's no way I'm that invested in all of these. I'm not that invested in the genre as a whole. So a lot of that was, okay, which one of these do I actually want to keep? In some cases, I had to just accept I have no interest in this genre. So let's get rid of all of these Highlander romances. Why do I have these? Or else I had to be like, okay, I have a lot of horror books for someone that only reads 3 to 4 horror books a year. This doesn't make a lot of sense. And I have other books that I'm more interested in this genre. Why would I keep these? So it was basically a lot of harsh honesty with myself and a lot of accepting that there are certain genres that I'm just never going to be that much of an expert in, that I'm never going to be that well read in, and it's just going to happen. Nobody can read all genres all the time. It just doesn't work. So I spent so much time deleting books off of my TBR. And I believe, if I remember correctly, in the month of January alone, I deleted 100 ebooks off of the app and off of my TBR, which goes a long way to telling you just how many I had and how many I was uninterested in. Now, as the year progressed, I would go back and again be like, okay, this book survived the last round of unhauling. Do I still want it? Does the reason it survived the last unhauling still count months later? And in a lot of cases, a lot of books that I let slide, like maybe through previous unhauls, I then unhauled later. And thankfully, again, these were all ebooks. It was really easy to just delete them. And a quick side note here, because I know we're talking a lot about deleting ebooks to get returns. These are not books I read. These were not books I was interested in. I am not one of the book talk girlies using indie authors as a library. And again, in most cases, a lot of these were books I downloaded for free. So deleting all these ebooks is not the same thing as the book talk girlies buying an ebook, reading it, and then returning it. Different. But regardless, let's move on to how I worked with the physical books. The physical books were infinitely harder to unhaul because I actually had to pick them up and take them somewhere. Now, there are a couple little free libraries not too far from me. The thing is that most of those little free libraries are in places that I would consider the demographic of that little free library to be for small children. They're either in front of elementary schools or other businesses that are catered to small children, like the Children's Museum. So I didn't feel right putting my adult books in there. So if I had a lot of mid-grade to hand out, that I put into those little free libraries. But as a result, those weren't as useful to me. Now, could I have done more research into finding more little free libraries in the greater area? Probably, but even so, a lot of these little free libraries are small and they don't have a lot of free space. So all of that searching would have only netted me a place to put 2 or 3 unhauled books. It wasn't going to be feasible. As a result, I focused more on a local secondhand bookstore called Book Rack in my area that does kind of consignment. And what I mean by that is, when you bring in books and they accept them, they will give you, I believe, 1/4 of the book's publisher price in store credit. Now, to understand just how many physical books I brought to this store, I currently sit at, I believe, over $150 of store credit at this store. And again, remember, they only give you 1/4 of the publisher's price when they take your books. And thankfully, they actually have a system where the books that they don't take in for their stock, they know where to donate. They know where to give them, that they're actually going to go to somewhere, as opposed to overloading a poor thrift store that's not meant for that. So that's why I used the Book Rack as most of my unhauling for physical books. And it was also really nice to have all of that book credit, despite the fact that I barely use it because of my TBR challenge, but we'll get to that later. My husband actually uses my store credit when he wants to buy new cookbooks, or he buys script compilations for his theater students. So he's actually made bank, although you can only use up to half of the purchase with store credit. So if you're buying a book that's $10, you can only use $5 of store credit towards it, which is fine. I get it. They got to keep the lights on or else people would use them as a library. But that was really, really helpful. Honestly, I probably have kept books that I would have unhauled if they were in ebook form, just because I don't like having to take actual trips out to the bookstore, because also you have to like hang out there while they go through your books. And while I'm hanging out there, I feel like I have to be buying more books because I'm giving them all these books. And so then I feel pressured into adding more books onto my TBR. And it's a whole thing that is probably all in my head. But it resulted in like anxiety of, okay, am I prepared to add at least one book to my TBR if I go and I bring this bag of unhauled stuff? So that was more of a psychological issue than I expected it to be. And as a result, I have not unhauled nearly the amount of physical books that I would have otherwise. And I'm still sitting here looking at this shelf in particular. This bookshelf that you see behind me is much better curated, books that I am much more interested in, whereas a lot of my not sure books go over on this bookshelf that I'm not going to show because it is a mess. This entire office is a mess. And so I might do more of that in the future. But for right now, I'm really happy with the unhauling that I've done. But unhauling was only part of this story and part of the way that I had to change basically my entire mindset around books moving forward. So let's talk about the rest of the TBR challenge. To talk about the Lower the TBR challenge, we do have to break out the bullet journal. So I have actually tried doing this before. In January of 2020, as you can tell by the bullet journal, I first started this with the goal that I could not get a new book until I had read 3. And at the time, I was only monitoring what form that book took. As a result, this thing is littered with a lot of indie reviews. Oh my gosh, I read so many indie reviews in January of 2020. What up? I need to bring that energy back. Okay, sorry. But I didn't put the name of the book, but also I realized that 3 books was a lot, because usually by around, book 2, I was already eyeing the next new book, but I still had to read a whole other new book, and I kind of dropped this pretty quickly. This is the only TBR spread I had for the entire year of 2020, and then I didn't do anything with it for 2021. But if we go to 2022, I tried it again. This time I did two books for every one new book read. My thought here was that even if I'm only reading 2 before getting a new one, that's still 1 more off the TBR. However, I realized another problem with that, and that is the fact that, again, I still wasn't saying the name of it, so a lot of cases I would forget, did I get a new book? Was that the new book I got? Because it just said new book crossed out. So then finally, it occurred to me this year to actually write the titles of the books that I read and the new books that I got, so that I remember, okay, I already got a new book for this. But what this did in changing my thought process in buying books is it made me put so much more effort into thinking about getting new books, because I had to think, is this book specifically worth taking up a slot? Is it worth saying, yes, I'm getting it, and now I can't get another new one until I've bought 2? And in a lot of cases, it helped me really think about how much I wanted that book specifically. Why did I want it? Did it just look good? Would it fit for an upcoming readathon? Would it fit for a Pop Sugar Challenge? Was there another booktube video I wanted it for? Did I have another reason to want to get this book as opposed to just it was a book I could get? And originally when I did this, I did not include review books, meaning that I did not include review books as books that were written on here, and I did not include getting new review books as taking up a slot. And at the time, my thought process was, I don't want to essentially make it harder to accept new review books by saying, oh, well, I don't have a slot open. However, it had a reverse problem, which is that I wasn't feeling energized about reading review books, because I could read all these review books and not gain any new book slots. So I was still reading books, but not gaining any new book slots. So part of the way through the year, I finally started saying, okay, we're going to include review books in this. and I would include them both in books that I read, and also I had to have new slots open to accept them. And I think I might be changing that again in the future. I think I might say review books count towards getting new books, but do not take up a slot when I get them. Mostly because arcs in all publishing senses are very cyclical. So like there's a lot of arcs in early part of the year, in midsummer, and in the fall, and a lot of months of low time in between. And so as a result, I could never keep up with having enough free slots open during those kind of like quote unquote rushes in publishing. So I think in the future, I might say that indie books do count towards getting new books, but do not count as taking up new book slots. And you can also see here, if this works, I had things like 5 books unhauled. This happened late in the year. Once I had gotten past those giant unhauling 100 books like sections, when I had to take more time into what I wanted to unhaul, then unhauling 5 books counted towards 1 slot towards getting a new book. Again, this is a very confusing system. I don't know if I've quite cracked the code yet. I think there's still a couple new ones that I need to do to work with everything that I need it to do, but I am proud of this system. However, you can also see this was the layout for, what layout was this for? September, and it is unfinished. Basically what happened was in a couple points of the year, I dropped the TBR challenge, meaning I did not limit the books I got, purely because it wasn't working for me at that time. I would be going through a reading slump maybe, or I knew it was like, you know, my birthday month or a holiday month, and I knew I was going to be getting a lot more books. So I would pause it for that month and then reinstate it the next month. And honestly, that did not put me too far behind, because I'd already set this precedent in my head of focusing on books that I really wanted, that I was going to use for booktube videos, or were somehow there was a purpose to it as opposed to just getting a new book. When I did go off of the TBR challenge, I wasn't suddenly grabbing giant amounts of books again. Even now, as I have it paused and I'm like preparing, like I'm storing up books as I'm preparing to go into a TBR challenge for 2023, I'm not buying giant hauls. And the books I am buying, it's like continuing a series or an author I've read before. It's still a lot of thought put into it. So that's why I love this challenge so much, is that it genuinely altered how I take in books. And it's kind of breaking the buy all the books to get all the books, even from like libraries, because those were included. This setup, these slots, included any form of getting a book, getting it for free from a secondhand store, buying it new, ebook, borrowing it from a friend, like anything, it counted. The difference was for libraries, I would get the library book, bring it home, but I did not add it to the TBR unless I actually started reading it, because a lot of cases I'll bring the library book home and then either A, forget to start reading it entirely, or like read part of it and decide not to do it. So library books didn't get added into the TBR until I was like very sure that it was actually going to be the thing I read, but those were also included technically under the challenge. Moving forward, I intend to continue. I have already made the spread for this next month's TBR. I did realize that that's a typo. It's not actually number 4, it's like number 8. I've already screwed up this bullet journal spread like 3 times now. I've used so much whiteout. Regardless, I am really excited moving forward. I don't foresee any other giant unhauling sprees where I'm like taking out like 100 books, but I definitely think I still have more yet to do with my physical books, a lot more physical unhauling. I'm gonna rack up so much credit at that store. But it's been a lot of fun. I'm really excited for the changes. I've brought it up briefly in some other videos, but having the privilege of being able to put a lot of thought and having access to information about books wasn't something I had growing up. I had to take whatever books came my way because I literally could not afford to be picky. We were literally too poor for that. And I do not take it lightly that I can put in research and effort and buy specific books from specific places to be the most eco-friendly. I recognize that that is a giant act of privilege that a lot of people don't have. However, I also think that if you have that privilege, you should be using it to slim down your purchasing, because as much as books are awesome, they are still taking up non-renewable resources. They require fresh water to be made. They require fossil fuels to get across to people in different shipping areas. We still should be putting in the effort to make the books we get the books that we are most likely to want to read for whatever reason. And I am really glad that we're seeing that more widespread across BookTube, that people are putting in more effort into only focusing on the series they want to read or doing TBR 0 challenges. We should be doing this, and I like that we're turning away from the maximalist, get all the books all the time, always mentality. This is not to be a put down to anyone who still gets a lot of books. I know that, again, some people don't have a choice in what form their books take or what areas they can get their books from. I am just happy that I have managed to slim down my TBR as much as I have. And that is it. Are you under any kind of TBR challenge, maybe a TBR 0? Are you going to try starting one in the new year? Do you have any specifics to your challenge? I think that this kind of thing really depends on the reader. Each different reader is going to require different aspects to their TBR challenge to really make it work for them. I'm really excited to be opening to review requests again in the new year. I might have to do a 24-hour readathon on January 1st just to get some of those slots opened up for all the books that are coming out in the new year. I am so jazzed, so happy with the future of my channel right now. So please let me know your opinions in the comments below. And with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.